Today is November 18th, 2024. This is episode 65 of the In a Nutshell podcast. I'm your host, Sean Vowells, and as usual, I'm joined by Joe Meade. Tonight, Joe and I will go over the Week 12 action in the Big Ten in football. And Joe, that includes 7 games. We've got just 2 weeks left in the season, and we're going to start off with the game that happened on Friday night. UCLA heads up north to play the runners-up from a year ago in Washington. And, Joe, we didn't expect this to be all that interesting, and, it was interesting for parts of it. Washington led 14-10 at halftime before pulling away in the second half. A late touchdown made it 31-13. UCLA did pull one back late, but Washington gets the victory 31-19. They get to 6 wins, and the Huskies are going bowling.
John, definitely not the way I would have drawn it up if I was a Washington fan, let alone one of their coaches. You look at the game and how it went, and nothing jumps off the stat line. But if you watch the game, you would think the Huskies were in a pretty good position, up 14-13. And then Will Rogers, very uncharacteristically, throws 2 picks on 2 consecutive drives to open the half. Jed Fish, I didn't agree with him benching Will Rogers ever, but in this game, he proved me completely wrong. Put in the freshman Devon Williams Jr., and he completely changed the game. Any hope UCLA had after the Rogers 2 picks were gone. How he ran the ball, how he managed the game, and just the fact that he's an even greater running threat than Will Rogers ever could be. I think that really messed with UCLA's defense, and that's why at the end they got those last two TDs. The combo of him and Jonah Coleman, it's really too bad. I don't know if Jonah. I'm pretty sure Jonah has one more year left of eligibility. He does. I think that combo for 2025 Washington between Demond Williams Jr. and Jonah Coleman could be lethal. On the UCLA side, I don't want to critique them too hard. I still think they played a pretty clean game. Ethan Garber's 2 TDs, 27 of 44, 267 yards. That fumble was costly, but I thought his O-line didn't do a great job protecting him most of the night. So I'm not going to really fault him. And frankly, Sean, for anyone who just found out, he lost. This is his last year of eligibility, Garbers, because he was a holder on a field goal attempt in 2021. A few too many field goal attempts, I might add. So I feel very bad for that young man. And now Washington, Sean, I believe this is 20 or 21 straight home games won between the Kalen DeBoer era and the Jed Fish era. So the fact that they're playing at Oregon by principle, that's about 3 straight years with undefeated record at home. In spite of the 6-5 record, that is something Husky Nation and any Big Ten team, frankly, should take notice of going into next year. Although 6-5, likely a 6-6 finish, I think the games they won this year, especially the games against Michigan, UCLA, USC, I don't think the record is going to be very satisfying for Washington fans, but I think who they beat and how they beat them, and certainly inserting Demond Williams Jr. late into this game should give Husky fans a lot of excitement.
Yeah, Joe, have not lost at home, and away from their field, they have not won. So pretty interesting. They lost the neutral to Washington State and then every away game. So winning at home is something to build off of. That's how you finish at the top half of this conference. And it looks like they're going to finish in at least in the middle of the pack, which is good for them in a new conference, new team, new everything, remember, because they did lose essentially everybody from that team last year. All right, Joe, we'll go to Saturday, not quite the big noon kick, but the BTN noon kick. Ohio State goes to Wrigley Field to play Northwestern. No score after the first quarter. Northwestern actually takes the lead with a Jack Lausch touchdown, but 3 touchdowns before the half, and then a touchdown and a field goal in the second half was all the scoring there'd be. Ohio State took a little bit to get going, but at the end of the day, it's an easy win, 31-7 Buckeyes.
Yeah, Sean, I think after the first quarter, Will Howard did a really good job settling down. 15-24. Certainly the passing yardage isn't going to jump out. I think, though, ever since the Nebraska game, the efforts he's put together versus Penn State versus even Northwestern, who David Braun's a defensive mastermind. They took away the run, and it didn't really matter. They also took away Emeka Egbuka. He only had 2 receptions for 25 yards. It didn't matter. They have too many weapons. Jeremiah Smith, 4 receptions for 100 yards, almost had that TD at the beginning. I think they did make the correct call, although I will say if that was in Columbus, that probably would stand. Cardell Tate, the 2 amazing TD catches. One thing I'm going to make note of because it's impossible to. I think the TD angles on TV were complete and utter trash. I don't think it did justice to the plays that young man made. Uh, Running game wise, I didn't think Ohio State uh, was anything special, to be quite honest. I think Northwestern knew if that got going for the Buckeyes, that this game could have been even more out of hand. Going back to Northwestern, Sean, I thought they had a lot of positive things in the first quarter. Ultimately, though, I think that Jack Lausch fumble, even though they scored a TD after when they were in Ohio State's red zone, was super costly because that could have afforded them the opportunity to go up 2 scores on the Buckeyes, which probably would have guaranteed a game in the third quarter. Unfortunately for them, it was not to be. I thought Bryce Kurtz had made some really nice catches. Same with AJ Henning. Although it was only 5 receptions for 42 yards, 2 of the jump ball catches he made were spectacular. Unfortunately, though, once Ohio State gets going and you're a significantly less talented team, you're kind of in the jaw of the beast, and they're just going to bite down and clobber you until they finish their meal. So Northwestern, obviously an opportunity. Their next 2 games versus Michigan and Illinois, they won't be favored in those games. Although I do think, based on some of their efforts this year, they have more than a chance in both those games. Ohio State, Sean, they have the probably the game of the week, perhaps the game of the year. I'm going to shy away from saying that just based on how many good games we've had in this conference, but certainly the game of the week versus Indiana. So. Uh, Nothing to write home about for Ohio State, really. I thought this was just a good performance, and for Northwestern, that's probably about what you expected.
Yep. Northwestern came ready to play, but that doesn't usually last you very long. All right, Michigan State on the road at Illinois. This game was a lot tighter of a spread than we expected, with the Illinois Fighting Illini opening just a point and a half in front. And Joe, it was a lot more than that. 14-6 Illinois after the first quarter, 21-9 at halftime. It was a one possession game at the end of the third quarter, but 2 Josh McCray touchdown runs in the fourth quarter iced it. And the Illini win 38-16. Pretty good performance from Illinois to get out of their slump.
I thought it was a great performance by Luke Altmaier. I think this is the ultimate game for him in terms of the ultimate Luke Altmaier performance. 2 TDs, was pretty fearless running the ball. I know it was only 4 or 5 attempts, but he was not afraid to make Michigan State account for him. And I think that's what ultimately helped open the run game for a Josh McCray, even for an Aiden Laugherty to a certain point. Outside of that, though, Sean, Pat Bryant, that 57-yard TD, I think that's what changed the game and the course for Michigan State's defense. Obviously, it's been a really rough year for the Spartans in the defensive secondary. You lost Dylan Tatum opening night. This game, no Chuck Brantley, no Malik Spencer. From there, I think certain Spartan fans kind of just performed their own eulogy because after the Pat Bryant 57-yard TD in the first half, it seemed like Michigan State was just guarding against the big play, which unfortunately opened up run lanes for McCray, opened up a lot of other opportunities for Altmaier to extend plays, um, Zachariah Franklin, pardon me. In terms of Michigan State, one thing I do want to highlight is Aiden Childs, I think, has grown significantly. I know the Indiana game, a lot of people are going to say as proof as to what he hasn't done. But really, the last 3 of the last 4 games, he's only turned the ball over twice. And we're going to exclude the Indiana game because I think he was just chasing at that point. Between Iowa, Michigan, and Illinois, all 3 of which have very respectable and top-ranked defenses in the conference. He turned the ball over twice. One was a fumble, one was an interception. You don't love to see that, especially in the fact that all 3 of these games at a certain point were very tight and winnable for Michigan State. I think it shows significant growth. I know he missed a lot of throws. I know he took some bad sacks, but frankly, when your defense has no sacks through 5 games in conference play and your offensive line is allowing guys to live in the backfield, I don't know what a 17 or 18-year-old could really do to fix that, to be quite honest, Sean. So Michigan State, at a certain point, they're going to have to stop settling for field goals. I do think their next 2 games, the type of performances they've had against an Illinois and Iowa and a Michigan probably should be enough against Purdue. Rutgers, jury's still out, but a lot to play for the Spartans, but certainly a lot of cleaning up to do and a lot of healing to do for that secondary.
Yeah, they do fall to 4-6. Still a path to bowl eligibility, like you said. Those 2 games, both at home. both probably will be favored. And Illinois gets to 7-3. A little bit surprised to see them not in the rankings again. And they've got two away games to end their year at Rutgers and at Northwestern. All right, Joe. Up next, we've got Purdue against Penn State. This one wasn't close, 49-10, Nittany Lions, and will be remembered for Morset's catch behind the pylon for a while. But Drew Aller does the job. 250 yards passing, 3 touchdowns. They get no rusher with over 8 carries. Bo Prabula sees a little bit of action at quarterback. This is exactly what we asked for Penn State.
Yeah, Shaw, this game was over from the get-go. Drew Aller, I do want to highlight. I think this was the first or second game with over 15 attempts for Penn State in their history where you had as high a completion percentage as Drew Aller did. So congratulations to him. Ever since the Ohio State game, him and Prabula. Prabula's gotten in on a few of these games too. Between Purdue and Washington, two teams that Penn State has blown out and frankly should blow out as a top five team. Uh, they've looked outstanding. The defense hasn't missed a beat either. Tyler Warren, I don't want to sound outlandish, Sean, but I'm just going to go out and say it. If it weren't for an Ashton Genty or a Travis Hunter, those two guys probably leading the Heisman conversation, I couldn't see why Tyler Warren couldn't be up there. I'm certainly not saying he should win the Heisman, or even if you eliminated Hunter and Genty, that he would even be in the top three. But I think the young man deserves a lot of praise. Certainly should be up for the Mackey Award. Certainly, if he keeps this going, scoring TDs, rushing, receiving, uh, I can't see why he can't be a first round draft pick. The guy is a lethal weapon. The guy has numbers of a receiver and a running back. So I think that in and of itself should speak volumes for Penn State. They do have the bye week this week. I think that's really good for them. Purdue up next at Michigan State, and then a game versus Indiana. I don't really see a light in the tunnel for Purdue. The only game they have a chance of winning is versus Michigan State, but based on the way Childs is taking care of the ball, uh, very unlikely. So I think the spoiler makers are officially dead for this year. And Penn State, good to get to the bye week because I think that game at Minnesota is going to be a lot trickier than people are going to give it credit for.
Yeah, that gets the 3:30 slot this Saturday, Joe, and Purdue gets Friday. So, two prime TV slots for these teams next week. So, Penn State, barring a total catastrophe of, they'd have to have some serious big losses by their opponents to get into the Big Ten championship game. It's not likely to happen with them losing the tiebreaker to Ohio State, but they have a tough Minnesota team on the road, which is certainly no gimme, and they probably need that one to get into the college football playoff. All right, up next, Joe, we've got Dylan Raiola and Nebraska going on the road to play Jaden Maeva and the USC Trojans, and it's the Trojans that get the W, 28-20. Maeva with 260 yards passing and 3 touchdowns with 1 interception. Raiola with 2 picks. Woody Marks adding nearly 150 yards on the ground. USC looked pretty solid as both these teams get to 5-5.
Yeah, Sean, I want to highlight one thing for Nebraska before I eviscerate them, and a lot of people have been doing that, especially their own fan base. I think hiring Daniel Holgerson, sorry, the former West Virginia and Houston coach in the middle of the week, to call offensive plays was very gutsy. I did think for the most part in this game it paid off. I don't think there were any huge communication issues. I thought a few of the timeouts were more on Dylan Raiola than the coaching staff. With all that said, though, Sean, this is the same old for Nebraska. And frankly, both these teams know the story of this game all too well. Luckily for USC, the only team that can out USC is Nebraska, because Nebraska in this conference has been a thing ever since 2015. So, Sean, I thought Maeva played well. I think the fumble and the interception were just two boneheaded plays that frankly is a symptom of him not playing for a lot of the time. Obviously, Miller Moss was on the sideline. Interesting to see where he might go next year, as we've indicated. Outside of that, I thought USC did a good job spreading the wealth. Deuce Robinson, Zachariah Branch, Kyron Hudson, even Woody Marks getting in on some of the receiving action. I thought this was probably their most balanced offensive game. I think if Maeva didn't have the 2 turnovers, this game is a lot more out of hand. And in terms of the fourth quarter, I thought Lincoln Riley called it perfectly. He didn't panic when Maeva fumbled. He gave him the same responsibility after the fumble, after the pick. And I think that instilled a lot of confidence in him. Maeva, although it's his first start for USC, this guy's been in college football for a while. He started for UNLV last year. So I think if you USC, you can't help but be happy. These games have gone against you, whether it was Maryland, Michigan, Minnesota, so often, and Washington too, that you kind of just take this and you have UCLA and Notre Dame. I think one of those games we all know which you have a better chance to win, and maybe you build something into bowl practices. And Nebraska, we're going to talk about Wisconsin in a second too. Their game coming up on this Saturday is probably their biggest in the rule era so far. So certainly no room for error for them. And again, I think it's just really disappointing that the defense played pretty outstanding and the offense can't help them out and can't finish at times.
It it's hard to see Nebraska beating either of the two teams they have left on their schedule. USC didn't do anything crazy here. They did a lot of things well, but USC just thought, all right, we're not going to have to do anything crazy here. We just have to play our game and we'll win. They did make a ton of mistakes and they still won. So disappointing for Nebraska here. No matter what expectations you had for them, whether it was a little bit on the outlandish side, like maybe getting into the college football playoff, or just being a solid 8-9 win team, neither of those are going to come true at this point. And they've got two chances at home against Wisconsin and on the road at Iowa to extend their season. And at this point, you have to think that they're not going to do that. For USC, they have that UCLA game, like you said, and then they've got a chance to really do some damage when they host Notre Dame on the 30th of November. So they're still playing for stuff out there, that's for sure. And Maeva, he's only a sophomore, Joe. There's a chance that he's a starting quarterback next year for USC. So maybe he can play his way into that role. All right, two more games, Joe. We got Rutgers on the road at Maryland. Athan Kalikmanis and Kyle Monungai lead the Scarlet Knights to bowl eligibility as Rutgers wins 31-17. It was a pretty close game. Maryland taking the lead after a third quarter touchdown, but it's Rutgers that ends the game strong, and the Scarlet Knights are 6-4.
Sean, after that 4-game skid, I was one of many people who thought Rutgers was dead to rights. I thought that Minnesota game was going to be the penultimate penultimate game, which would lead to the funeral of their season at Maryland, losing to a team they're clearly better than. Me and you never fought for this spread. Maryland was favored by as many as 4.5, I believe, at game time, but it was really 3.5 most of the week. Rutgers, with Kyle Monungai back in there, looked as efficient as they have all year. And I understand Maryland's defense is not very good, and that Mike Locksley quote at Big Ten Media Days continues to age like milk. Athan Kalikmanis, 20 of 30. This is probably his best game as a Scarlet Knight, Sean. The last two games, I think he'd be most proud of in his collegiate career. Letting Kyle Monungai do his thing, and when he needed help, Athan made some big throws and spreaded the wealth pretty well too. I know Demir Miller and Ian Strong had 15 of the 20 receptions, but Athan Kalikmanis wasn't afraid to win this game on his legs either. And I think when Rutgers saw that and Maryland saw it, I think their defense thought it was just too much to handle, and it truly was. Especially when Maryland's offense, which has normally been pretty good, was as inefficient as it was on Saturday. Edwards, 1 TD, 1 pick, and they didn't lose any fumbles, Sean, but it did not seem like Maryland's offense could ever get in a rhythm. After the first half, the adjustments Schiano made, and especially into the fourth quarter, you could kind of tell Maryland's offense was lackadaisical, and frankly, some of their play calling was as well. I think they were just throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what stuck, and against the Greg Schiano defense, that's never a good idea.
Joe, my takeaway from this game is that I feel bad for Billy Edwards. I think he's a decent quarterback. He's probably in the top half of quarterbacks in the Big Ten, and he has just got nothing around him. And it's very rare to see a team. We all thought Maryland did have the quarterback advantage here. Kalikmanis plays well, and it's a convincing victory for the other team. That says a lot about the supporting cast of Maryland and how they're coming up short. Rutgers, all of a sudden, Joe, 6-4 with 2 winnable games up next. 8-4 is not out of the question. They host Illinois, like we said earlier, they are slight favorites as of now, which is definitely something to note before going to Michigan State in the last game of the season. So I think we both had Rutgers winning this one, and we're not entirely surprised the way that it went. All right, the last game of Saturday, Joe, probably the most notable result, certainly in the Big Ten and maybe even the country. It's Oregon that goes into Madison and wins by just a field goal, 16-13. They entered the fourth quarter with just 6 points. They tied it early in the fourth before taking the lead with just over 2 minutes left. But, Joe, this was definitely a nervous performance from Oregon, and had Wisconsin converted on just a couple more plays when they're winning, they may have lost this game.
Yeah, Sean, you looked at Dylan Gabriel's stats, no TDs thrown, no TDs rushed for either. If you told me Oregon was going to score one touchdown in this game, I would have thought it was the perfect recipe for an upset. We were always cautious about this game. Admittedly, I thought Oregon was going to have a business-like game, like I've said in the past, probably win from anywhere to 10 to 14 points and keep Wisconsin at a safe distance. This was anything but safe, Sean. I think the theme of this game for Oregon was survival. This was Dylan Gabriel's most inefficient game he's probably had. Even at Oklahoma, I rarely saw him have games like this simply because the defenses in that conference could not hold a candle to a lot of these defenses in the Big Ten. Ultimately, you look at the stat line and you don't think he did anything, but I thought his best performance was the scrambling around. He's almost impossible to sack, Sean. We've seen that on display all year. And the scramble he had in the fourth quarter to extend the drive and on the fourth down, this was amazing. When I listened to the post-game press conference, that 4th and 9 they faced, Wisconsin fooled them and thought they gave them the look. Oregon thought Wisconsin gave them the look they wanted. Then they switched out of it. So Oregon was operating off a plan A without a plan B. Dylan Gabriel just scrambled to find Terrace Ferguson, who's the ultimate cheat code, I think, in this conference, and extended the drive. They tied the game, kicked the field goal, and unfortunately for Wisconsin, offense is more of the same, especially in these close games. That's probably why Phil Longo today is out of a job. And next week, we're going to have the Nebraska-Wisconsin battle of the interim monthly rental offensive coordinators. I don't want to go too far into that. I do want to highlight Tawee Walker, 97 yards. I thought he was very efficient, especially for what this game was. I do think Braden Locke, that interception at the end, was the only real mistake he made. I think this was the kind of game you had to win like a 20-16 to 17-14. And I thought Locke, Walker, and the entire offensive coaching staff for Wisconsin knew that. In spite of that, Oregon just had too many playmakers make plays, and Wisconsin could not survive it. I did think it was an admirable performance. I thought the crowd brought it for a team that had 4 losses. It was really a hostile environment, probably the most hostile environment Oregon faced all year. So for the Ducks, this was probably your most gutsy win. I don't think you could afford another performance like this, even if it's against a Washington, because certainly after that game, the competition's only going to get more intense. So you survived your worst performance of the year. Really, really good teams do that. We saw Michigan do that last year at times, particularly the game against Maryland. We saw Ohio State do that last year, um, particularly their games against Penn State, and the 2022 Ohio State team did it against Northwestern as well. So good on Oregon. For Wisconsin, a lot of conversations to be had in that building to beat Nebraska and frankly into the offseason after they're pivoting away from this Phil Longo offense, which from the beginning, Sean, I thought was very strange.
Yeah, I'll go to Oregon first, Joe. They went field goal, interception, field goal in the first 3 drives. Both of those drives were moving pretty well. So good on the Wisconsin defense for holding them to because if they score touchdowns there, it's game over right away. The defense gave them more than a chance. And I think when Wisconsin had the lead, they just played too safe. They should have gone for the kill shot and to go up 2 scores. I thought they played too timid, too safe, too conservative, and if you give Oregon enough chances to score, they're going to find a way, and that's what they did. But you got to give your crowd something to cheer for. They did that, and they gave themselves a chance to really pick up a historic victory, and they come up just short. The talent for Oregon just was too much for them, and I don't know if it's official yet, Joe, but I would think Oregon, even with a loss to Washington, would be in the the Big Ten championship game. Um, there's a way that there's a whole bunch of one-loss teams that maybe they don't get the tiebreaker, but they're going to be there. And they do have off this week before one more game against Washington, so good for them. Every team has games like this. Michigan had them last year. Every number one team, they don't crush everybody, and this was an important victory. And you're still in the driver's seat to be wearing your home jersey in Indianapolis. So, and then in terms of Wisconsin, Joe, we thought they'd provide at least a decent account for themselves, and they did. I think it's just going to go down as a really missed opportunity for them to pick up a big win. But all right, well, that's all we have for them today, Joe. That is Week 12. Be sure to look out for our Week 13 preview, which will be coming out later in the week. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.